5, 1997, and Rosemary Pascente, a 64-year-old school teacher, was enjoying her day off, having a cozy evening in her 23rd floor apartment in the Bronx in New York City, USA. Sadly, she had no idea what awaited for her next. The next day, on January 6, 1997, one of Rosemary's neighbors noticed that the lights in Rosemary's apartment had been on since the previous night. In the evening, she decided to go and check on Rosemary. What she discovered when she walked into the apartment was something that would haunt her for her life. The cold, lifeless body of Rosemary Pascente laid in the kitchen of her apartment. Looking at the bloody scene, the neighbor collapsed to the floor, sobbing before contacting the authorities. Who could have done something so horrible to a simple elderly school teacher? What could have been the motive behind this ruthless murder? Today's case takes us to the Bronx, a borough of New York City. It is tremendously famous for inhabiting the largest cooperative-owned space in America, known as Co-op City. In addition to that, the Bronx is also home to the iconic Yankee Stadium, the Bronx Zoo, and the gorgeous New York City Botanical Gardens. For those who want to spend less on rent but still live close to other high-end boroughs such as Manhattan, the Bronx is the right place. But this beautiful neighborhood also has a dark side. The Bronx is only safer than 14% of U.S. neighborhoods. The chance of someone falling victim to a violent crime in the Bronx is 1 in 128, making it a significantly dangerous place. And this fact takes us back to 1997, when a 64-year-old lady was gruesomely murdered in her own apartment. Rosemary Pascente was born on July 28, 1932. Although not much is known about Rosemary's early life, it is definite that she never married anyone. For most of her life, Rosemary was the kind of woman who minded her own business and mostly kept to herself. In 1972, she moved to 140 Alcott Place, an apartment in Co-op City in the Bronx. For the next 25 years, she lived there alone, all by herself, and worked as a school teacher. Although she led quite a monotonous life, she would often step out to spend time with a few of her neighbors she had befriended in the building. Sunday, January 5, 1997, was quite a cold day in the Bronx, and Rosemary decided to stay in. The night passed, and on Monday morning, January 6, 1997, Rosemary never showed up to school where she worked. Her phone rang multiple times, disrupting the pin-drop silence in her apartment, but there was no answer. One of Rosemary's neighbors noticed something odd. The lights in Rosemary's apartment had stayed on through the night. However, she didn't put much thought into it. But when she tried calling Rosemary and got no answer throughout the day, she grew concerned. And then in the evening at 6:15 p.m., the neighbor decided to check up on Rosemary and went to her apartment. From the moment she arrived at Rosemary's apartment door, she had an eerie feeling. The door to the apartment had been left slightly open. She walked in slowly, taking small steps, afraid of what she might find. The neighbor's worst fears came true as soon as she walked into the kitchen and discovered Rosemary's body in a pool of blood. She shrieked looking at the gruesome scene and tried to pull herself together. She informed the authorities immediately, and soon Detective George Wood and Sergeant Curtis Oates from the New York Police Department arrived to inspect the crime scene.
She walked inside the apartment and she called for a friend, but there was no answer. After looking around the apartment, and she noticed the kitchen area, and she noticed Miss Pascente, the victim of a crime.
Rosemary's body was almost completely covered in blood. She was lying face down with a 9-inch knife still lodged in her back. Looking at the multiple stab wounds on Rosemary's body, the detectives could tell that she had suffered an extremely painful death.
I noticed maybe 20, 25 stab wounds in the back, in the neck area, 1 or 2 in the head, and it looked like she had been involved in a struggle with someone. I also noted some defensive wounds to her right hand, so she struggled with the perpetrator.
Detectives also noticed that Rosemary's throat had been slit, and the defensive bruises suggested that Rosemary had put up a fight against her attacker during the struggle between the two. Outside the apartment in the lobby, there was more evidence that supported their theory. Detectives found stains of blood smeared across the wall next to the elevator. However, there was no traces of blood inside the elevator. This led the detectives to search the staircase of the building, and on the 10th floor across a flight of stairs, there was another trail of blood. Detectives now believed that sometime during the struggle, Rosemary had managed to wound her attacker. Detectives were sure that the blood found smeared across the elevator wall and on the staircase 13 floors below Rosemary's apartment belonged to the person who killed Rosemary. This gave detectives an idea about how Rosemary's killer might have escaped the building. At first, they thought of taking the elevator and pressed the button with his blood-covered hands and left a trail on the wall. But perhaps the elevator was taking too long, or maybe they thought that given their messy appearance, someone in the elevator might suspect them. They then thought it would be best to take the stairs if they wanted to leave the building without being noticed, and that was what they did. While the bloodstains were a strong piece of evidence in the case, it didn't give detectives an idea of who the killer might be. The samples were obtained and preserved for further testing and future use. Later, an autopsy confirmed that Rosemary had been stabbed a total of 39 times, out of which 8 wounds were on her back. The knife found jammed into Rosemary's back belonged to a set from her own kitchen. This made the detectives believe that Rosemary's murder was probably not a premeditated one. They came up with the theory that when the attacker entered Rosemary's apartment, they initially didn't have any intentions of killing her. But when a struggle ensued, they did it anyway. And since there were some items missing from the apartment, it seemed like robbery was the motive behind the tragic incident. A few days after the murder, a funeral was held for Rosemary at Granby Cemetery, Granby, Hartford County, Connecticut, USA. Her loved ones gathered around to pay their respects, and she was laid to rest. Weeks and months went by, but there weren't any new developments in the case. Even with strong evidence and convincing theories, detectives were having a hard time coming up with any leads to follow. Soon the police department diverted their attention to a fresh trail of murders in New York, and Rosemary's case went cold. More than 2 years later, in May 1999, Detective Kevin Lawler from the NYPD was assigned to the cold case squad and handed Rosemary's case. Skimming through Rosemary's case file, he had an idea of how he was going to move forward with the case.
I requested that the blood recovered from the crime scene entered into the CODA system to be compared to any blood samples or any known subjects that were arrested that had supplied their DNA samples.
With assistance from Detective Mark Tebbins, Detective Lawler got the blood samples found on the elevator wall and in the staircase re-examined. The forensics department was successful in developing a DNA profile of Rosemary's killer, and it was uploaded to the Combined DNA Index System, or simply CODIS, which is a nationwide database of DNA profiles. All the detectives needed to do now was wait and hope for a match. After another 2 years, on August 20, 2001, Detective Lawler received a phone call from the NYPD Crime Lab regarding Rosemary's case.
I was informed that a match was made with the blood recovered from the crime scene with a subject by the name of Charles Jones.
There finally was a match through CODIS, and the person was identified at 28-year-old Charles Jones. Detective Lawler had been desperately awaiting this call, and now that he had the information he needed, he wasted no time in investigating the genetic link further. In order to make sure that he wasn't missing anything out, he performed a background check on Jones and uncovered some intriguing information.
I did a background check on him. I found out his priors, which were lengthy. I also found out that he had just been released from prison on a past robbery where he assaulted his victim with a knife.
Originally, Jones wasn't linked to Rosemary's murder, but since he had been imprisoned after pleading guilty to a robbery and assault of another Co-op City resident on August 13, 1998, he was required to submit a DNA sample right before being released on August 10, 2001. And then on August 20, 2001, when Jones's DNA profile was uploaded on CODIS, it matched with the sample that belonged to Rosemary's killer. Furthermore, at the time of Rosemary's murder, Jones himself lived in Co-op City, just a couple blocks from her apartment. While this strengthened the elevator against Jones, it still wasn't enough for Detective Lawler to charge Jones yet. Detective Lawler was quick to realize that while the blood sample evidence did place Charles Jones in the building at the time of the murder, it did not place him in any way inside Rosemary's apartment, where the murder took place. This could completely destroy the detective's theory of Rosemary's murder and give Jones a chance to escape. Detective Lawler and Detective Tebbins needed more information and stronger evidence to put Jones behind bars.
My theory was that the person involved with this homicide came into the building with the intent to rob somebody, looking for an opportunity to push into someone's apartment.
There was quite a bit of distance between that blood and the crime scene. So you have to establish how his blood got to that fifth floor hallway.
They decided to head over to Jones's house and have a talk with him.
We tried to track this individual down to his parole officer. We found out that he had a warrant on him And so our game plan at that point was to try to pick him up and talk to him.
We went to his apartment. I was informed that he wasn't home, that they didn't know where he was. The family was covering for him, just the mere fact that I was a police officer.
When the detectives arrived at Jones's place, they were told that he wasn't home at the time and that they should come back later. Since they didn't have solid evidence against Jones yet, they had to be extremely careful about the case, as even a slight misstep could cause all their progress to be lost. They didn't want anyone in Jones's family to learn about the reason behind their visit, which could tip him off and give him another chance to escape. And so they left a message for Jones saying that he had an outstanding traffic violation and they only wanted to talk to him to clear it. The detectives had to leave Jones's house without seeing him, but not without setting up a trap for him. A couple of days later, Jones took the bait and showed up to the precinct to talk about his traffic violation. The next steps were going to be very crucial, as Jones would soon be made aware of the real reason while he was called in for questioning. Detectives wanted to create a comfy environment for Jones before confronting him.
We had him think that he was being arrested for an outstanding warrant for a traffic violation. We brought him into the precinct. And at first, we sat him down in our office. We gave him lunch. We brought him a soda. We had him relaxed. We became buddy-buddies with him, so to speak.
After 30 minutes of being nice to Jones, the detectives began the interrogation.
And when I asked him if he had ever been in 140 Alcott Place, he told me that he was never in the building, that he had no need to be in that building. So with that, now I know he's lying to me.
Even though Jones seemed nervous, he still wasn't breaking, and so detectives threw in some facts to shake his confidence. They told him that the blood found in the building of Rosemary's apartment belonged to him, and that was enough evidence to link him to Rosemary's murder.
He looks at me and he says, well, I used to deliver groceries. And one time when I was delivering groceries, I had cut my hand on one of the shopping carts. And maybe that time was when my blood was left in the building. Then I went on to tell him that, well, why is it that your blood was found in the building the same time this woman is murdered in the building? I said, can you explain that to me? And he sat back and looked at me, put his head down, and stayed silent for a good period of time.
Listening to this information, Jones changed his story. The process still didn't seem like it was working. Detective Lawler had to do something more to break Jones and get a clear confession out of him. He walked up to his desk, picked up an envelope, and pulled out a bunch of pictures and laid them on the table in front of Jones. The pictures showed Rosemary's body lying cold and lifeless on her kitchen floor. Detective Lawler thought this might drive Jones into admitting his guilt, but he was wrong.
And he still wouldn't look at the pictures right away. He just kept his head down. He was looking at the floor. And then finally looked up and started looking at the photos that I was showing him of the victim, which weren't nice. Then I went on to say, well, you know what? I'm going to charge you with this homicide. He's giving me no response.
The tensions were now high, even after several attempts of making him speak the truth, but the detectives were not letting him go anywhere. The interrogation went on for another 8 hours and only came to an end when Jones finally gave in. He decided to confess to the murder and cut a deal for his plea bargain. By stating a straight 8,
He sits back, starts looking through the photos again. And he says, well, you have to guarantee me I can get a straight 8.
Jones meant that he would serve only 8 years in prison for a full confession of the murder.
I told him, I can't guarantee you're going to get a straight 8. I said, again, I'll tell you, I'll speak to the DA. I said, you know, whatever you and your lawyer work out with the district attorney's office is out of my hands. With that, Mr. Jones decided to tell me the whole story.
By now, Jones had realized that there was no way out of this mess. One way or another, he would have to give in and suffer the damage for his actions. But thankfully, Jones chose wisely. Instead of contesting the accusations against him, he gave Detectives Lawler a full confession, hoping that it would help him during his sentencing.
Open the door. I'm on this side. She seen me. She panicked. I'm trying to tell her I'm delivering her groceries. She grabbed a knife and I stabbed in the back, trying to protect myself.
According to Jones, the whole incident was merely a misunderstanding. He was persistent that Rosemary attacked him first, and he only acted in self-defense.
Basically, he's, how can I put it, hunting at random. This was a victim of chance. When Mrs. Pascente confronted Mr. Jones, it appears that she went to her kitchen drawer and pulled out a knife to defend herself from this unknown person who had just entered her apartment. A struggle ensued where Mr. Jones took the knife from Mrs. Pascente and repeatedly stabbed her about her body, also cutting her throat. After that, Mr. Jones said he just left the apartment, taking a few items. That was it.
However, something about this confession wasn't sitting well with the detectives. At the time of the murder, Jones was 23 years old, almost 6 feet tall. A well-built tall man defending himself from a 5'4" elderly woman seemed like a made-up story. While it did seem like this wasn't premeditated murder, the detectives weren't fully on board with the idea that Jones acted in self-defense. Charles Jones was arrested on Friday, August 24, 2001, and charged with robbery in the murder of Rosemary Pascente. Jones was made aware that if he contested the accusations against him in the court and lost, it would end in a lengthy murder trial with a possible death penalty as the outcome. On the morning of January 11, 2002, in the Bronx County Courthouse, Jones pleaded guilty to a charge of first-degree manslaughter and was handed a sentence of 19 years behind bars. Charles Jones's capture brought closure to many of the Bronx residents, but especially to Rosemary's loving neighbors. Even though their friend was long gone, she would never be forgotten. Rosemary's case being solved brought a huge amount of relief to her family and friends. Belinda Bailey, one of Rosemary's neighbors and friends, said that her friend's murder remained a mystery for almost 4 years, and those 4 years were the most painful for her. She lived right down the hall from Rosemary's apartment, and whenever she crossed it, she would think of her. Even though it took some time, the detectives were able to solve Rosemary's case through DNA technology and bring closure to her loved ones. Detectives are now determined to implement the same technology to crack thousands of other cold cases and serve justice to victims like Rosemary and their families. Jones's confession told a different story from what the detectives had theorized. Do you think he was hiding the whole truth or not? Apart from Rosemary, Jones was linked to another assault from 1998. Do you think there are more cases in which Jones escaped from undetected? Let us know your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. If there's a case you'd like us to cover, don't hesitate to drop your recommendations in the comments section below. For more captivating true crime stories, like, share, and subscribe to our channel.